What if I told you that some of the boldest and most unforgiving films of the 1960s weren't coming out of Hollywood, but out of Britain's soot-stained backstreets? These weren't glamorous escapades. These were raw, unpolished slices of life that dared to ask questions no one wanted to hear. Why did audiences flock to stories about failure, frustration, and dreams that refused to come true? Stick around, because some of these films should never have slipped past the censors. The Knack and How to Get It, 1965. Imagine swinging London, but without the gloss. Richard Lester's The Knack and How to Get It might look like a comedy on the surface, but underneath, it's pure kitchen sink realism in disguise. Lester had already directed the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night, so audiences expected another breezy ride. Instead, they got a film that poked at male ego, gender roles, and the unspoken rules of modern life in a city that was changing faster than anyone could keep up. The story follows Colin, an ordinary schoolteacher, painfully shy and awkward, in a culture obsessed with charm. Enter Tolan, his roommate, who struts through London like he owns it, flaunting confidence and arrogance. What happens when these two worlds collide? Chaos, awkwardness, and a mirror held up to a society that pretended it had figured it out, when in truth, everyone was just stumbling through. What made it kitchen sink at its core wasn't the swing, but the sting. Lester stripped away glamour, shot in grainy black and white, and filled the screen with claustrophobic London flats and dingy hallways. The laughs were uneasy, the energy frenetic, and the underlying message impossible to miss. This wasn't about winning, it was about how hollow the idea of winning had become. Critics called it daring, audiences called it confusing, but it walked away with the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Not bad for a film that turned everyday insecurities into cultural commentary. Charlie Bubbles, 1967. What happens when a working-class hero finally makes it big? Charlie Bubbles asked that question, and Albert Finney, directing himself, delivered a film as melancholy as it was groundbreaking. Charlie is a successful writer, famous, wealthy, and respected. Sounds like a dream, right? But beneath the glossy surface, there's a man suffocating under his own success. The brilliance of this film lies in its emptiness. Charlie visits his estranged wife and son in Manchester, and suddenly the trappings of fame feel meaningless. He dines in silent restaurants, wanders through lifeless mansions, and drives past the very neighborhoods that shaped him. Instead of triumph, the film gives us alienation. It's not about what Charlie has gained, it's about everything he has lost. Visually, the film leans into bleak spaces. The camera lingers on cold interiors, empty streets, and faces that say more than dialogue ever could. Finney used his own life experience to ground the film, and you can feel it in every frame. This isn't a movie about escaping the working class, it's about how escaping can leave you rootless and lost. Audiences expecting glamour were puzzled. Critics, however, recognized its honesty. It was less a film, more a meditation on fame's empty promise. Kitchen sink realism wasn't just about poverty and factories anymore. It was about the lingering weight of where you came from, even when you thought you had left it behind. Kess, 1969. Few films cut as deep as Ken Loach's Kess. This isn't just a story. It's a gut punch. At the heart of it is Billy Casper, a boy trapped in a world that never gave him a chance. His home life is broken, school is cruel, and the future promises nothing but factory work. Then he finds Kess, a wild kestrel hawk. For the first time, Billy discovers beauty, pride, and a fragile sense of freedom. Loach shot the film in Barnsley with non-professional actors, giving every moment a documentary feel. The flat accents, the rough edges, the smoke-stained classrooms, this wasn't cinema pretending to be real. It was real. The scenes between Billy and the hawk, filled with quiet wonder, were contrasted by the harshness of his teachers and family. One minute he's soaring, the next he's dragged back into the mud. The film shocked audiences with its unrelenting honesty. There's no happy ending here, no sweeping redemption arc. Kess isn't about triumph, it's about truth. It forced viewers to see the way Britain's working-class children were trapped in cycles they never asked for. Loach's refusal to soften the blow turned the film into a masterpiece of social realism. Critics hailed it as one of the greatest British films ever made, and decades later, it still breaks hearts. That it ever got green-lit is proof that sometimes the most painful stories are the ones we need the most. The Girl with Green Eyes, 1964. At first glance, The Girl with Green Eyes might sound like a simple romance, but peel back the layers, and you'll find a film that digs straight into the messiness of class, love, and moral judgment. Desmond Davis directs Rita Tushingham, already a kitchen sink icon, as Kate Brady, a shy Irish girl living in Dublin. When she falls for an older, worldly writer, their affair unravels into something far more complicated than forbidden love. This wasn't the polished world of Hollywood romances. This was fragile, awkward, and brimming with social weight. Kate isn't glamorous, she's vulnerable. Her relationship isn't celebrated, it's dissected. Her friends gossip, her family disapproves, and society looks on with disdain. The camera lingers on cramped boarding houses, cold streets, and silent arguments that say everything without a single raised voice. What shocked audiences wasn't just the age difference. It was the film's unflinching honesty. It dared to portray a young woman making choices outside of expectation, fumbling, falling, and yearning for something more. Davis used subtle detail and emotional realism to strip away the fantasy of love, leaving behind something that felt raw and authentic. Tushingham's performance was so genuine, it anchored the entire film. Critics called it tender and daring in equal measure. It's kitchen sink at its finest, exposing not just how people lived, but how they felt when no one was supposed to be watching. Darling, 1965. What if ambition doesn't set you free, but traps you? John Schlesinger's Darling gave audiences that bitter pill, wrapped in stylish black and white frames that masked its razor-sharp realism. Julie Christie plays Diana Scott, a model who climbs London's social ladder with charm, wit, and determination. But the higher she climbs, the more hollow it all becomes. At first, the film seems almost glamorous. Diana is beautiful, she's witty, she's everywhere. But Schlesinger never lets us forget the cost. The parties are empty, the relationships shallow, the promises broken. Diana isn't celebrated, she's consumed. What looked like freedom turns into a cage made of wealth and expectation. The film peels back the shiny veneer of swinging London to reveal a truth no one wanted to admit: success doesn't always mean happiness. Christie's performance was magnetic, winning her an Academy Award. But it was also heartbreaking, because the audience couldn't escape the realization that Diana was never truly in control of her own life. Every scene reminded viewers that the system was bigger, colder, and less forgiving than anyone wanted to believe. Darling pushed kitchen sink realism into new territory. It wasn't just about council flats or factory workers anymore. It was about how even the supposedly glamorous could be crushed under the weight of society's empty promises. It was bold, it was uncomfortable, and it left audiences wondering, what's the point of getting everything you want if it leaves you with nothing? I'll never forget What's His Name, 1967. Advertising isn't supposed to look bleak, but Michael Winner's I'll Never Forget What's His Name turned the glossy world of consumerism into a battlefield of disillusionment. Oliver Reed stars as Andrew Quint, a successful ad executive who one day smashes a typewriter, walks out, and begins searching for meaning in a life that suddenly feels hollow. Sounds rebellious, right? Except the film isn't about triumph, it's about just how empty modern success had become. Winner exposes the machinery of advertising not as a glamorous career, but as a grind of manipulation and exhaustion. Andrew drifts through relationships, unable to connect, unable to care. Every moment is filled with silence, detachment, and a creeping realization: success is just another trap. Reed's raw presence, restless and simmering, made the film feel more like a confession than a performance. What made the film daring was its refusal to celebrate rebellion. It doesn't pat Andrew on the back for breaking free, it shows him stumbling, confused, still chained to the very system he's trying to escape. That irony, that gut-punch honesty, gave the film its kitchen sink edge. Audiences were unsettled because it didn't offer escape, it offered a mirror. The critics were divided. Some praised it as biting satire, others thought it was too bleak. But looking back, it feels shockingly modern. A film about burnout and alienation in the 1960s? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment, 1966. If kitchen sink realism is about ordinary lives colliding with harsh truths, then Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment, flips that on its head. Directed by Karel Rice, one of the movement's pioneers, the film follows Morgan Delt, a working-class artist who refuses to live by the rules. He fills his life with wild daydreams, surreal fantasies, and anarchic stunts. Yet behind the chaos is a heartbreaking truth. Morgan is losing his grip on the very world that rejects him. David Warner's performance as Morgan is unforgettable. He's funny, eccentric, and at times absurd, but the humor never hides the loneliness. His marriage is falling apart, his career is unstable, and his defiance only deepens his isolation. The surreal imagery, guerrilla costumes, wild visual cutaways, and hallucinatory bursts gives the film a chaotic energy. But it all circles back to the same core, the crushing gap between who we want to be and what society demands. Audiences in the 1960s weren't ready for a character like Morgan. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a villain, he was just lost. Critics admired the bold blend of realism and surrealism, while some dismissed it as too eccentric. But beneath the oddball humor, the film spoke directly to anyone who ever felt trapped by conformity. Morgan wasn't just a character. He was the embodiment of a generation torn between rebellion and despair. Term of Trial, 1962. When you think of kitchen sink realism, you think of factories, pubs, and crumbling flats. But Term of Trial dragged that raw honesty into the classroom. Directed by Peter Glenville, the film stars Laurence Olivier as Graham Weir, a teacher whose compassion for a troubled student spirals into controversy. It isn't a tale of triumph. It's a brutal reminder of how quickly good intentions can collapse under suspicion and judgment. Weir is a war veteran, scarred and disillusioned, now trying to connect with students in a bleak post-war school. His kindness toward one girl, played by Sarah Miles, sparks rumors that snowball into scandal, threatening his career and reputation. The film never sensationalizes. Instead, it carefully shows how small misunderstandings and society's quickness to condemn can destroy lives. What made it so powerful was its restraint. Olivier doesn't play Weir as a saint. He's flawed, awkward, sometimes too vulnerable, but that's what makes the story sting. It's not about guilt or innocence, it's about how easily society turns on those who don't fit the mold. Critics admired the film's courage to tackle taboo subjects with honesty, though some audiences found it too unsettling. Term of Trial didn't deliver neat answers, and that's why it still resonates. It's a study in suspicion, morality, and the fragile line between compassion and condemnation. The Servant, 1963. Power, control, dependence. Joseph Losey's The Servant stripped those dynamics bare in one of the most unsettling films of the 1960s. Adapted from Robin Mulham's novella, the story follows a wealthy young man, Tony, who hires a servant, Hugo Barrett, played with chilling brilliance by Dirk Bogarde. What begins as simple employment twists into a psychological struggle where roles reverse and the line between master and servant dissolves. The film's brilliance lies in its atmosphere. The London townhouse, elegant yet suffocating, becomes a cage. Losey fills it with mirrors, tight angles, and silence that screams louder than dialogue. The relationship between Tony and Barrett isn't about work, it's about dominance, manipulation, and the uncomfortable truth that class divisions are never as stable as they seem. Audiences expecting a straightforward drama were stunned. This wasn't just social commentary, it was a dissection of dependence itself. Bogarde's performance was mesmerizing, shifting from dutiful servant to sinister manipulator with terrifying ease. James Fox, as Tony, perfectly embodied the slow collapse of privilege when confronted with relentless pressure. Critics praised it as daring and psychologically complex. Some viewers found it almost too claustrophobic, but that was the point. The Servant forced Britain to look at its class, structure, and ask an uncomfortable question: who's really in control? Accident, 1967. Some films whisper their message instead of shouting it. Joseph Losey's Accident is one of those films. At first glance, it looks like a quiet story about university professors, but under the surface, it's seething with tension, jealousy, and unspoken desires. Dirk Bogarde plays Stephen, a professor whose fascination with a student leads him into a spiral of betrayal and regret. On paper, it could have been a soap opera. On screen, it became a haunting study of power and repression. Losey crafts every frame like a trap. The Oxford setting, with its grand halls and manicured lawns, isn't comforting, it's suffocating. The professors aren't noble guides of the next generation. They're fragile men, consumed by their egos, wrestling with insecurities they can barely admit to themselves. When an actual accident jolts the story forward, it doesn't feel like a twist. It feels like an inevitability. What shocked audiences wasn't just the scandalous relationships, it was the honesty. The film dared to show the moral failings of Britain's intellectual elite, stripping away their polished exteriors. Bogarde's subdued performance gave it even more weight, portraying a man undone not by crime or poverty, but by his own weakness. Critics praised its subtlety, while some viewers found it almost too slow. But that slow burn is what made it unforgettable. Accident wasn't about action, it was about watching lives collapse in silence. The Pumpkin Eater, 1964. Jack Clayton's The Pumpkin Eater is one of the most devastating portrayals of family life ever put on screen. Anne Bancroft stars as Jo, a woman caught in the endless cycle of marriage, children, and societal expectation. From the outside, she looks like the perfect mother, but inside, she's falling apart. The film doesn't give her a clear villain to fight. Her struggle is with a world that demands everything and gives nothing back. Clayton films Jo's life in stark contrasts: the noise of children's laughter, followed by the crushing silence of isolation. The pressure of domestic duty is shown not through speeches, but through long pauses, uncomfortable glances, and Anne Bancroft's extraordinary performance. You don't just watch Jo's exhaustion, you feel it, like a weight pressing down. What made the film so unsettling for its time was its refusal to sugarcoat the realities of motherhood. Britain in the 1960s wanted tidy images of happy homes. This film gave them the opposite, a portrait of loneliness inside a crowded house. Critics praised its emotional honesty, and Bancroft's performance won international acclaim. But audiences were divided. Some called it too bleak, too raw. That's exactly why it remains a cornerstone of kitchen sink realism. It exposed the quiet, invisible struggles that polite society refused to see. It Always Rains on Sunday, 1960s. Technically made in the late 40s, It Always Rains on Sunday roared back to life in the 1960s, embraced by a new generation of kitchen sink audiences. Why? Because its themes of domestic struggle and trapped lives were more relevant than ever. The film centers on Rose Sandegate, a stepmother in East London whose humdrum life is upended when her former lover, an escaped prisoner, hides in her house. Sounds sensational, but the execution is pure realism. The brilliance of the film lies in how ordinary everything feels. The rain-drenched streets, the cramped homes, the constant grind of survival. This isn't a glamorous crime drama, it's a portrait of suffocation. Rose isn't a femme fatale. She's a tired woman, caught between duty and longing, desperate for a life that slipped away. The escaped man isn't a hero either. He's just as broken, just as trapped. By the 1960s, when the film was reintroduced, it fit seamlessly with the kitchen sink movement. Its gritty East End atmosphere, its focus on working-class routine, and its unflinching honesty made it feel decades ahead of its time. Critics hailed it as a forgotten classic, and audiences realized that the struggles it depicted hadn't gone anywhere. The rain kept falling, and so did the weight of everyday life. Jenny Agutter's performance brought heartbreaking vulnerability, anchoring a film that dared to end the decade on a note of quiet dread. It wasn't about triumph or resolution, it was about how confusing, lonely, and fragile life could be when the world was changing faster than anyone could keep up. So there you have it, 15 more British kitchen sink films from the 1960s that somehow made it past the censors. They weren't glamorous, they weren't easy, and they certainly weren't polite. But that's what made them powerful. Which one shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe if you love exploring hidden cinema, and share this with anyone who thinks the 60s were all about swinging London. Because beneath the music and the fashion, the truth was much harder to ignore.